Okay. Okay. So at this point, I'm kind of regretting that I didn't sit on the couch. It might have been a bit easier. It's still there. Maybe we'll adjourn there in a second. And the first thing I would like to pick up on the thread that some of the threads you finished on the end, that for those of you, I'm an elder lemon at this stage. I say that frequently. Even though, unlike Cristina, I think I'm still a teenager at the same time. For those of you who are young here, and maybe not so young, having a place like this, because when I first started to make pictures here in Ireland, it was late 80s really. And for a long time, and I used to refer to photography in Ireland, especially what we would call then independent photography, as the camogie of the arts. In the sense, it really was. It had all the right things and was, done to the same professionality, but it was just parked because of literature in particular and music. And so a place like this also doesn't just happen on its own. It needs great commitment from two people in particular, and then staff behind them to really support that, and then of course support from the Arts Council recognising such commitment, because there is a connection. I won't go into too much biographical stuff, but many years ago I was involved with a group that we held the first the Arts Council had a group show of art photography in the very early 80s. I'm going to give you a little history lesson now here, called Out of the Shadows, and it was a touring show. And I still have a catalogue. They're very rare now. I managed to get one from the Arts Council. And then there was a big lacuna, nothing happened. And then in a group, I think it was 87, a group of photographers, were mainly street photographers, got together and wanted to hold an exhibition of contemporary, what we called contemporary Irish photography at that stage. So out of that group came two exhibitions in the Guinness Hop Store. The first one was invited, the second was half invited and half open submission. So out of that then I got involved with a group that was involved in the initial move of the original gallery of photography, for those of you who may or may not remember it, that was on Wellington Quay into the newer thing. And then, as always happens in Ireland, there was a split. So I didn't like the way the direction was going when they moved to the bigger thing, so I pulled away, and the rest is history. So I then began my own journey into photography. And I've been making pictures, as I say, I won't count the years now, but it's certainly over 30. I'm self-taught for what that's worth, so all the mistakes are my own. I can't blame anyone else. When it came to this show coming up, I had reached a point, probably because, and you all know about the flood and all that, possibly some, and I didn't want to bang on about it, because I did a little bit in the summer about the flood. I showed some of the works that had been damaged and tried to transform them into like something positive. But definitely I had felt it's really strange that in about January or February I had spent a lot of time looking at older work and had revisited and revised. And my way of working sometimes is to, when I think I've come to the end of something, and I could work like Cristina for a very long time, and sometimes projects come to an end because you just exhaust the possibilities. Sometimes it's because you're simply not physically in the same mental space or physical space. So I went back to some works and I looked at it, and I've made an awful lot of work, but I've exhibited very, very little. There's a huge amount of work that may not escape and maybe shouldn't, but I think some of it is strong enough to escape, and maybe it will sometime. But I'd reached a stage where I felt I was like, I don't know if you have ever watched a movie about the Second World War where the British soldier has been caught and the German says to him, "For you, Tommy, the war is over." I kind of come to that feeling, having done this thing, that this notion of pictures and photographs existing and not existing. I spoke about this during the little talk I did during the summer. That, I had a lot of work that wasn't on my website, which is quite substantial. And it's just, they're there, they exist, they survived the flood, but do they actually exist because they're on a negative, they're on a contact sheet? And will they ever exist in that other world? And I kind of come to the the conclusion that it's game over, you know. It exists, we have to see what happens. It may end in a skip eventually, which is a terrible thing, that all that time and all that energy and whatever. And then the opportunity came along, and I had to really dig myself kind of out of a hole to try and find how to put this together. And so for a long time I made very specific projects, particularly the early work was, because I was in Ireland at a time when it was really changing quite dramatically, and we had this beginning of the separation of church and state, the beginning of a belief in Ireland as a country that could stand on a kind of world stage. And I always think there's two cultural moments, Riverdance being one of them, and then the European Championship and the World Cup. Certainly the World Cup, the qualifying for that was like the belief to be on a world stage. So I've made a lot of projects since that period. I also at that stage worked with Gogo, my other half, and I used to prefer working with her because I could hide in the shadow and she liked the limelight. And we did a lot of installation work together. And we did about 3-4 shows in quick succession. And then she got tired with the art world, and she went off to start mainly writing, but she's still primarily a visual person, very visual writer. And I think it's important to acknowledge, I often thought there's a very interesting documentary to be made, interviewing the partners of particularly photographers or artists, because they can be both muse and just understanding psychologist, and the editor and critic. And it's very important to have that voice that's close to you, but also quite independent. So I always think it's important, and part of the thing I was trying to do with this work is also acknowledge that presence, both in the text and in some of the images. The other thing that I would say that the big influence, and I was talking last night about it, is unfortunately, he's become very popular, is Beckett, unfortunately, okay? It's an overused reference now for a lot of people, possibly. But I got into Beckett, I tell the story, I was very young, at 11 or 12, and we had just got what was called piped TV. Some of you are old enough to remember it, so that meant we went from 1 channel to 4 channels. And one morning, I think I was about 11 or 12, I turned on the telly and there was this mad play, drama, and it was Godot. And I didn't know what it was because I came into it. It was on this thing called the Open University, as part of their literature course. And I watched it, and obviously I was transfixed by it, but in the paper it just said Open University, no details, no. So, and I carried in my head for years, what the hell had I seen? And then I think I was about 18, 19, something like that. I started to go to exhibitions. And I went to an exhibition in the Douglas Hyde, and there was a visual there. It might even have been the tree, the famous tree. And then there was a title that referenced the text. Now, a puzzle solved, you know. And then I went and read the actual text, and then I've seen the production numerous times. So for me, there's that sort of black existential thread that runs through what I try to do. I always feel that this very final image here, which is supposed to be the final image, is actually maybe the beginning of it. This man walking along with the sack of sand, and he's bent over, and the sand is kind of his great effort to carry whatever is in this. You can take the sand as a metaphor for time or whatever, is just falling out behind him. And he doesn't realize it. So I decided that was a kind of a nice image to end on. And in structuring this, these works come from the way, having moved away from very thematic projects, I now work with, all these images have the title when they're put into the software initially and anchored as their file name is Attempts at a Successful Day. And again, that was a text or a little title I picked up from a book I read about Godot, where someone wrote that Waiting for Godot was all about Didi and Vladimir and Eastergon's attempt at a successful day. So how they entertained themselves, how they passed the time. So I just thought that this use of this title then allowed my daily kind of engagement with the world and my daily psychology it allowed that to be facilitated and to be able to respond to things in a very open way. Most of the images now I make have that title, and then every now and again, sometimes I do it primarily to try and close off things or just to put something on my website that looks somehow coherent to show that I'm actually still alive, or seem to be. But they all come under this moniker. And kind of like what Cristina was referring to, for me, this whole thing with image making is actually very organic. And I'm not as organized to have them in folders. They're in one massive kind of folder in here. But I do feel that it's this thing of dropping in and out of pictures. So some of these pictures were actually made in 2008, 2009. Some of these pictures were made this year. And in that I was trying to avoid a narrative, because one of the things that I'd come to in that period early this year, I'd actually made 2 little books. I usually make blurb books to kind of get some sort of sense of where something is. And it was the first time I made a body of work where the whole idea, it was about 30 pictures, and the whole idea was that they were completely unconnected. And that's part of the title. I won't give the entire title away yet. But it was about this, having a sequence of images that are supposed to be completely unconnected, that there isn't a kind of theme run through, but actually, of course, there's a connection because I've made them and I've stood and responded to something and they've registered with me for whatever. But in the sequencing and the editing, I was trying to really separate them out as much as possible. And then when it came to making this, as I was doing it, and the process for me, because I lost a lot of stuff in the flood, even equipment, when I came to edit this, I started initially with a kind of a digital representation to scale on a computer, but I couldn't relate to it. So I then started to work that very old way with photocopies, and all scaled to about 1/3 size. So I'd have to go to the local photocopy shop, come back, I put them on the wall, and the wall had been scaled to sort of model this place. And then you'd go and you'd look, and then the next day you go up and say, no, I don't like that one, I don't like that one at that size, go back to the photocopy shop. And so they got to know me quite well. So it's over that period of time. And one of the things I'm slightly uneasy is that I think it's maybe there's too much of a narrative going on in this. But as I wrote in the text here, and the text here really kind of explains much, much better than I'm doing now, where this has come from and what it's trying to do. And it's also part of things, some of the things I'm hoping, particularly in the wee room, is that people will actually, you are supposed to lift this. Someone asked me yesterday, are you supposed to lift this? And it's part of the sort of little jokes, they're very bad jokes that I try to have in here, but that, all the images are framed here. And this one, which is an image of framed images that are behind something to protect them, is actually a naked print. And protection is a kind of a thing that's running through this, that because of what happened in relation to that dam flood. There's various things like the protection around the tree, around the corner that are there. They're there to protect, but one of the things that relates to the title Solastalgia is a kind of sense of powerlessness that arose as a result of that event. That you try to protect your home and your archive, and yet you're overwhelmed by something that has an environmental connection. So within particularly the small room, there are lots of things that are there to be interacted with, but probably most people won't. Okay, well, please do see if the first image as you go in, there's actually a photocopy of a negative, and if you notice, it's not quite mounted perfectly over. There is a second image underneath that, so if you lift that, you actually see a positive photocopy of the negative. I notice you're not laughing very much. I told you it's a very bad joke. The other thing I like to play with sometimes is text buried in images that are, and the difficulty there is trying to make that subtle, but not completely gone. So there's this image here that has a text in it. Some of you may have noticed it, some of you may not have noticed it. And to try and draw that out, that's why I put this text here. And it was kind of, because this text doesn't make quite sense on its own, I was hoping someone might start to go in close to look to that, and then actually see that there is a text here. And if you read the text in its entirety, it kind of makes sense, and it kind of brings the thing to a conclusion. There is another image in the show which has a text in it that's probably totally invisible, and you can try and hunt for it. It's in that final image there in black and white. It's buried in the leaves. And I try to do that because I find images are very susceptible to being manipulated by text, you know. And some artists like Willie Doherty used to work with that sort of dialogue between a very, you know, quite present text and a sort of a poetic engagement between the text and the image. I was just trying to do the complete opposite of that with this. Any questions so far? And then we'll just talk briefly about the room. Yes?
Can you talk about the constructions in those two images?
These here?
Yeah.
Okay. So this and this come from a series that kind of came out of, I hate to mention that other disaster, COVID. And this was known as, you know, this is a kind of a series which is, to me, somewhat anti-still life. Okay? You're trying to make still life, but it's not like beautifully lit. It's lit with a single kind of harsh light. And in this case, I was trying to both put loads of objects in here that have meaning and yet have absolutely no meaning, really. It's kind of ridiculous to me. But it's one of the things that I find that in still life painting, they're loaded with all these allegories and metaphors. And of course, there are some things in here that make sense, like this is a fossil. But there was also this thing of, I have a couple of these of me then, I call them performative still lifes, for want of a better term, where I'm actually engaging with it. And it's a slight joke that, because it was made in Italy, about La Dolce Vita, the good life, and that I can't actually resist the grapes that are present in the still life. I'm consuming my own still life. The other image is, again, made in the same thing, but it was just this, again, part of our, we have a kind of a zoo. And it's, again, partly due to Gogo and her deep relationship with animals. This is a blackbird that our dog, Click, found at the base of a tree 4 years ago now. So he's called Clock, of course he would be. And that's actually him there now. He's completely free in the house. And these are lovebirds that we have some, and they are released at times. We used to have this very zen cat, but he unfortunately died this year. He was 22. But this sort of thing, again, has small little things going on about freedom, being caged and being free. They're kind of very subtle, very personal in some ways. But the idea of the still lives to me is that kind of, to some extent, being anti this normal representation of a still life. Does that make any sense? Using bad lighting, theoretically, and then also trying to engage with some of them, and also use objects that are not kind of like the classical serious objects of a still life, like fruit, poultry, things like that. So things that, some of these things like the fossil have a definite meaning, but other things then have, it's really whatever you have in yourself, you know. But there are little connections to, I'd like to think, that this sort of triangular thing with the eye is being repeated with the triangles that appear throughout the show, like at the very first image where I put that triangular thing beside what is the lacuna in myself. These sort of things, that triangle has loads of possible spiritual readings. Because I know when I first started to make pictures, I used to get this, it's less so now, I don't know if Cristina gets the same thing, a really deep kind of, I'd say almost spiritual rush when you had an image, that you felt not only witnessing something that was really touching you, but also the fact that you were actually nailing it and holding on to it. You know, it wasn't just something that was going to pass by into the flow of the river. That's what that triangular thing is for me, that triangle of light, that kind of, it's still there, but it's much less these days. Okay, any questions? Yeah?
Could you explain this room a little bit, its placement in the exhibition?
Which, this one?
Yeah, in there.
Oh, the room?
Yeah, the room.
The room.
It seems almost Francis Bacon-esque, but
thank you very much. I'll take that. No.
Don't want to have a particular structure in the show. I feel from reading the text.
Yeah.
But that feels very, like there's a lot of intent behind how everything's placed.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. You're dead right, and I recognise you because you started with me just before I left. I've forgotten your name, excuse me. Rachel, yeah. Okay. Good question. This room is a kind of, I had many problems trying to anchor a proper title for this room, okay? So initially, and I have referenced it when talking to Ankel and Julia, the folly, okay? An act of madness. But the folly also, one of the things that I find sometimes with us Irish people is that we like to play with language, and actually, unlike again what Cristina was saying that she didn't like about words being quite anchored with a meaning, I think when you look at Joyce and people like that, they kind of really played with what a word can mean. So a folly actually has many, many different meanings, and in architecture, a folly, I don't know if you've ever come across an architectural folly, it's a building that is built for purely decorative purpose that has no function whatsoever. And there are several of them around Ireland. But normally they are something that you look at from the outside. So I was kind of looking at this, I don't think it exists, as a kind of an internal architectural folly. But also I felt it's kind of, like, I hate to say it, it's actually what's going on in here and in here. And there was a kind of an echo of that notion of Virginia Woolf, a room of one's own. So a place where you can just be yourself and work out of yourself. And then the other thing that I was thinking of recently was maybe a memory palace. Now, I don't know, again, I'm trying to invert that a little because the correct use of a memory palace, I don't know if you've come across that term before. It's used as a system to remember things. So you literally walk through a house that you create and you place things in each room to help you remember. I'm kind of just borrowing that term and trying to put it in there. And so the room itself I had started to make in Lugo, in this back house here, which is my was supposed to be my studio. It's not finished. We're very fortunate in the end of the garden we have this 2-story structure. It's rough and ready. But on the top floor of this, I just one day started to just put stuff up on the wall, and the basis of this room started. And so I came here with very carefully photographed and annotated heights and distances. And then when I got here, I knew the room would be different because it doesn't have windows, and my room does. I literally anchored 2-3 things that were mainly the frame things, and then just invented it from that moment in the 2 days I was here. So it was taking something as a basis that I think on one level I hope is both chaotic, but also kind of holds itself together with its own internal logic. I don't know. Well, I mean, what was the feeling you're getting?
Is it supposed to reference the rest of the show at all? Or
it's supposed to have things that reach out into the show.
It seems like the structures seem similar to this.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And there's even a simple thing. There's the wing of an angel statue that's in that still life over there. There are certain things. And again, without trying to do a big arrow to it.
Yeah.
And if people pick up on them, great. And if they don't, they don't. But I think there is, or I'm hoping there is, little rewards that you might get if you do spend a bit of time in there in particular that might kick back in here and maybe deepen the thing. But you know...
Sorry, there was one idea, I suppose, when we were talking about the layout in terms of like the gallery being rectangular and having this room that protrudes into the gallery, and that kind of like brought the home and the loss, I suppose, into the gallery. So there's a very different vocabulary in the work that is in this side of the gallery and from the home, I suppose. And I think that was kind of like one of the reasons, I suppose, why some of the walls are unfinished, that there's something unconventional happening, or something dramatic happening I'm coming into the gallery space, breaking it.
Yes, and even something that I had to do, unfortunately, in the house was cut, into the plasterboard, and because we were underwater for like 2 days, so it meant I had to go in and literally, and we didn't want to replicate it fully, literally cut away plasterboard from about a meter 20 down, take out insulation. So it was kind of trying to reference that, also that rupture and the way that it bursts into the room as a rupture in the way that the flood. So a lot of the stuff that are sort of remnants from the flood, and some things that I decided to save and see if I could save them, because with other stuff within a day or two, there was mold on them already. And I didn't even know with some of the stuff that I kept that whether I was just keeping a laboratory of some sort of infectious disease for the future. It was always on my mind. And there's other things like, see that, I don't know if you can see that photocopy there of the marks, and there's another diptych there. They're like, to me, they're like scars. And they were the marks left by the claws that took away people's possessions, basically. That when you'd left the stuff outside your door, they came about 2-3 weeks later, and this thing just took this. So again, you're trying to get that reference. And the other things that's in there is that whole thing where you have letters in the tree, the struggle to find words to maybe put into text in the images. So in some ways, there's a lot of stuff, and it's not that it's a Rubik's Cube that has a definite answer. I'd be hoping that some people will get stuff and find their own thing and their own threads and their own experiences, because I always feel that people come to pictures or images or art or painting or sculpture with their own personal experience, and there's a dialogue hopefully between them. Whether that happens or not is another thing. One of the things that people do is they do the chicken thing when they go into exhibitions. I used to call it the chicken effect, and it's one of the reasons why I do this kind of up and down movement, is that if they're all what used to be the classical way in the early days of all the same size images, all in a line, and I used to see people go like this, stick the neck out, and never really kind of look at the pictures, kind of in the way that people do this today. So by playing around with size, you're hoping that people might go in and also stand back, and so it's trying to have a little bit more engagement. But, this image here to me is about like that notion of you think things are going to go on forever and infinity, and actually it's flipped. But again, it's going into a bundle of images and trying to pick something out that you feel now fits with this. And it's kind of creating, I don't know, at best a little sort of novella, if you're lucky, without it being explicit.
David, I wonder just on that last point you were saying, when you look around the room, I can recognise projects. When you were going through selecting these images, maybe not the images themselves, were there projects where you're like, right, well, I'm definitely going to reference something from that project, something from that mind palace, and was that a part of that kind of decision making?
Oh, it's going on whether it's conscious or unconscious, and even this thing of, I'd like to see that picture at least get out into the world from that thing, because the rest of it may never appear. And I'd like to have it out there, and maybe someone will pick up on it, and maybe we might be interested to go and look at the rest of it. Yeah, for sure. It's so, every day you get up and I think Bob Dylan said something like, I'm a different person every day, a different person from the morning to the night. And your interactions with people and in the environment you're in, well, for me, it shifts. There is a core thing, but I do think there's this organic, dynamic thing that goes on. And I'm lucky, I live with someone who is, I call, an artist of the floating world. You know, she's a very particular person. And there's that dialogue as well that goes on, either, as we used to call it, the zing-zing. So it's either verbal or there's just a communication. Because in the very early days when we started to show work, people used to call it a collaboration. And we always hated that word. We felt it's more, well, it was too precious. It was more like a communion. So it wasn't about me, a photographer, and her, a sculptor or whatever, coming together and trying to, we were both doing things, but without actually saying, I did that or I did that. And in that whole process was also, I used to really love that, was that it was about, like, sometimes you'd go to a show and there were things there that I wasn't fully comfortable with, but I would run with it, trusting her judgment on that. And then she had to do the same with me. And somehow, between all that, you hope that there's a kind of a dialogue. Because there's also, and I don't want to get into dangerous territory here, particularly in this days of gender and all that, but if you simplify it down to, shall we say, the very basics, and I'm not saying it is this, let me be very clear, of like the male energy and the female energy, and I think there's loads of subdivisions within that now. I'm not one of those deniers of that. I do think we all have different levels of that male-female energy in us. And at different times, one sort of comes up and down. And where I think a lot of people who maybe don't become creative or don't allow themselves to become creative kind of deny some of that energy. Now, I would say Gogo has a lot of male energy in her at times. And I have a reasonable amount of female energy, not just the long hair. So I think that dialogue, both internally and externally, is also very interesting. I just wish she did a show last year on her own too, in where we live, and it was a beautiful show. And it too kind of related to that terrible event as a way of, also I think, exorcising, without being maybe hopefully too indulgent, exorcising a ghost, exorcising, even if you want to call it a trauma. And one is always wary of calling it trauma, because there are people experiencing things. We only have to look at all the conflicts that we have now. There are people enduring far greater things, but any sort of life-changing event is a personal trauma that you have to somehow process. You have to work through to try and get beyond it. And if you don't, then that's when you end up on the couch.
Do you think the show has done its job?
Oh, I'll tell you in a month or two. I'll tell you in a month or two. Possibly. For me, anyway.
So for the room in there, it's very much visibly all over the place,
yeah.
In a sense. The whole layout of everything else, even just the colours beside each other, it all makes sense. And with the two, maybe I think you said just two images where there's text in them, how did you decide those two images in particular? Because there seems to be a clear decision of how everything was laid out.
Yeah, it's that thing, you see, I'm a trained scientist. And so my great big battle is between the logic part of wherever it is and the more, what I would call, intuitive, creative side. So most of the time I spend most of my time suppressing that logical thing. But at the same time, the importance of order, I think, is necessary to try and help people engage with something who are coming in to something that is so personal to you. I feel in there, while it's chaotic, there is, to me, it feels ordered in its structure. I don't know about, did you find it? And why do you find it's structured, or where are you getting that? What's helping you do that? I mean,
Maybe it being in the context of the formalised exhibition space gives it that platform that it feels, okay, everything here is there for a reason.
Okay.
Maybe it'd be different somewhere else.
Yeah, okay.
And also, obviously there's clear connections between the work and the walls, sort of felt very intentional, but I wasn't sure.
Okay. Well, I think it would be great if the National Gallery or the Parnell Square wants to buy it as a rival to the Bacon Room. That ain't going to happen. Anyone else got any questions? Don't be shy now. don't sidle up to me later, because you could be saying something that I've missed. I mean,
Is it the same cloud?
Yes, it is. It is. And funny, it was one of those things. I now live in a place called Lugo, and I was invited there in 2007 to do a project. I was there for 2-3 weeks, and Lugo is known for a thing called the nebbia, the fog. But I was just invited, and I was to make a project about the place. And when I got there, it was covered in fog for 10 days. So the project became about the fog and about this little joke again, terrible joke, about I've been brought to a place to kind of show it, and actually you can't see it. So I was making pictures too of the landscape covered in fog. And at that time I was doing a series where I used to make pictures of myself in the landscape doing that gesture with a small digital camera. I mean, that gesture is now gone, really. People do this with their phone. But in the very early days of phones, people used to do this thing very often. And I kind of saw it as a kind of, let's go back to my Catholic upbringing, kind of like the thing in Mass where the priest lifts the thing, as like an act of worship. By making an image, you're kind of acknowledging something. So I made this series where I interspersed the pictures of the landscape with me in the landscape trying to make pictures. But you actually don't get to see the place because it's covered in this blanket of fog. So those images, I went back on a visit then in 2012, and we were just driving along one day in a car. And I just saw this cloud, and I had to I just kept photographing it, and then I just decided to incorporate it here as this, trying to generate a sense of movement. I don't know what it does for you, but that was my intention in this, to try and give that if you cop on that it's the same cloud, that you're moving through a particular space that has the same cloud hovering on it.
For you, when I was looking at specifically the cloud, it was just that carrying of thought, through those three images, and then it flows through. It's actually just as one, it's just more of an observation, a question. I came on Thursday to have a look at the show, and we obviously see the image there, and then over the last 48 hours we've seen the decision on Soldier F, and we obviously see probably we're looking at a quite different president going forward. It was something that struck, it's not really a question for you, David, but just even those images 20, 30 years later, just that power of the context of a country that has changed and an environment that has changed. Now, even in a couple of days, it can really reframe an image quite significantly.
Absolutely, and even at the time, you're also referring to that work. I'm known for, it's a better word, for a body work called Innocent Landscapes, and in there, the image right in the centre of the wall, that's a contact sheet that is all completely distorted. If you wish, if you do it carefully, you can pull that out and you'll find the negatives that are there. And that was one of the hardest things about with this. So the bulk of the analog work, practically all of it, and it was nearly 10 years of work, was destroyed. All the negatives were destroyed. And it was very painful on a double level, because here you had the disappeared, I felt being disappeared for the second time. I had attempted to try and make them visible through photographing the searches for them, to mark that thing, and then this thing had come and literally dissolved and made them disappear again. So that kind of made it more powerful. But yeah, that's the one thing about images, the context, the passage of time. They somehow can be more significant than you thought they might be even at the time of making, and acquire a greater depth and power. So maybe some of that other work will appear someday. We'll see. We'll see.
You talked a little bit about wanting to disrupt how people look at the work through, like, I don't know, the chicken scene of like this. Wanting to disrupt that. Was there any part of you that thought about it? Because you mentioned a little bit the performative aspect of some of the other works. Was there any part of you that thought about the install in a performative way, like the work takes on almost a performative role?
I'm hoping that. I really am hoping that.
But do you feel a sense of accomplishment if somebody comes in and doesn't interact or doesn't kind of, like, is there a little bit...
Go on, finish the sentence there.
I don't know, is there a little bit of like, I don't know, usually people do something with a purpose and then it doesn't get done and they're like, fuck, I kind of did.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a little bit that's like, an accomplishment of, oh, they didn't do this. That was kind of like, now they're the performative role.
Yeah, oh no, that's sweet if you see that happening. But at the same time, what you can't do is beat yourself up if it doesn't happen. Because, okay, maybe you have failed, for a better word, to make them do that. But at the same time, they are their own entity with their own baggage of whatever, and they may not decide to do that or may not be able to do that. So,
because you talked a lot about the subtlety and the you know, kind of putting it on the lower level of playing. Was there a purpose of that, of wanting people to not engage almost, you know, because it's like you talk about disrupting.
Yeah, no, there is this thing of, I suppose the flip is really not to make it blatantly obvious, but it's that fine line of, if you come down to a level of subtlety that only you see it, you could say, well, have you actually achieved your communication? And that's why maybe talks like this are of some value without trying to make the Rubik's Cube and show all the sides all perfect colour. You know what a Rubik's Cube is, yeah? Just you're young. I think they've come back into fashion, haven't they? I think they have, yeah, recently. So I suppose it's trying to give illusions and trying to talk maybe to the gallery staff if someone had a question, or maybe they might say something to someone to do it. And then leave clues, you hope, that like, that this not been perfectly aligned. That someone who's curious, like with going in and looking at the text, you will see that actually there is the and this little is another terrible joke about having something positive from something negative, because that's a destroyed negative.
I think what I was more so, you're talking about making jokes towards like, oh, the work is making a joke, but is it more kind of, is there any sense of it that's kind of like towards the people who come in and they stick to the like exhibition norms, that's kind of the joke, like, oh, they didn't.
I suppose, yeah, I prefer the word that I'm not making fun of them, but trying to be playful. I think that's what I'm trying to do. And have a sense of playfulness about it, that hopefully people will do that. But I'm not trying to make fun of someone if they don't, you know. Like, for example, I'll give you a good example in a different way. When I did Innocent Landscapes, which I don't know if you know the work, but I photographed when in very short thing. As part of the peace process, the IRA finally admitted that they had disappeared 10 people from the Troubles. They were all Catholics, they'd all been disappeared, but they'd all been buried down south. So one of the first things that people would say to me, how's your work in the north going? When they heard I was doing this work, and actually say, this is in the newspapers, this is on the television, and you assume it's north. They're all the places that are in the south. But one of the things that I got an insight there is that I was photographing landscapes that would have a little clue sometimes as to what was actually happening there. But I had it once, it was shown in the opening of the Centre Culturel in Paris. It was the opening show when they developed that. And I had this group of women who came in, elderly women, and they thought these were lovely pictures of Ireland, you know, because they were beautiful green fields. And then when someone told them on the way out, literally it was like they had been punched in the stomach. That was more violent. But there was this lovely volte-face, which then made them go back and look again. But what I would like is for someone to find that having looked in a text outside and then come back and look with a fresh eyes. Because ultimately, when you're a photographer, it is all about looking, framing, deciding what you put this little window around, and deciding, like that act of worship, what's important, what's not important. Well, for me. Okay, did that help? Yeah, okay, thanks. Anyone else? I don't. It's nearly midnight. The clock's nearly gone back. I better shut up now. Give an Irishman a platform. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming out on a bank holiday Saturday. I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. And if there's anyone else who does want to ask me something, you know, who didn't want to ask in front of people, because I understand how that happens, please, I'll hang around. I'll lurk. I'll lurk. Okay.